Birdland Breakdown. Anytime I hear a song or any mention of Birdland, Birdland Breakdown, Birdland Jazz Club, I think of a story my dad used to tell me. Way back in the day, about 1951, they had just gotten out of basic training because my dad was in the Air Force. And they were in San Antonio, Texas. They got sent out to New York, to the Big Apple, before they made their trip to Landsberg, Germany, by ship across the big pond. So by they, I mean my dad, Benjamin Perea, and Johnny Cash. They were good friends in the service. They had a few days before they were going to be shipped off across the ocean in New York. So they thought, we got to do something really cool. We're not going to be back here for another 3 years. So they didn't have Google back then. So they asked some people what was the latest, greatest thing to do. Turns out there was a new jazz club. It was called Birdland Jazz Club. This was 1951, like I said. So it was fairly new. They said they had the best music there. So of course, Johnny Cash, my dad, got totally excited. They both loved music. They showered up, went all the way downtown to Broadway. And when they got there, my dad said, it was the hugest line I've seen my whole entire life. He said, went around the building, but we weren't about to give up. We were bound and determined. So they stood in that line and they made their way, finally made it to the front. Big bouncer, looked down at them like, you guys are not getting in here. My dad was always quick on his feet. He said, John, give me $5. How much you got? He said, $5. He said, yeah, give me $5. $5, give me $5. So John did not want to part with his $5, but he gave my dad $5. My dad pitched in $5, handed it to the guy at the door. $10. That's nothing today. Back then, you can Google it. $10 was the equivalent of $100. So the guy let him in, and they made it. They found a table. Finally, he said it was so crowded, but the music was outstanding. They found a table, ordered some beer. He said, Benny, you would not believe the music I heard that night. It was unbelievable. I'd never heard anything. I wish you could have heard that. And of course, I wish I could have heard it, because back then, of course, Birdland Jazz Club was named after Charlie Bird Parker, only one of the most famous jazz musicians ever. And so they listened to the finest music ever, having some beer, enjoying themselves before they're shipped off to Landsberg. And my dad told John, he said, watch the table. He said, I need to go to the restroom really bad. So of course they didn't want to lose their table, so John stayed at the table. My dad goes into the restroom. He said, well, I was working my way through the crowd, all kinds of rude comments directed towards me. And just as a side note, my dad, Benjamin Perea, from a small town, Estancia, New Mexico, tall, slender, is predominantly Hispanic, didn't blend in with that crowd that night. Johnny Cash, small town boy, Dyess, Arkansas, a bigger guy, white, did not blend in with the crowd that night. You know what I'm talking about. So my dad goes into the restroom, then he steps out. He said, Benny, I was in fear for my life, he said. I've never seen anybody that big in my life. 3 huge guys, he said. 3, and they were in my face instantly, talking trash. I tried to diffuse the situation, he said. We're just here having some beer, listening to some good music. We're going to be stationed in Landsberg. We're going to have a good time before we set off overseas. We're in the Air Force. These guys were having none of that. They were in my dad's face, and it was getting bad. And then he said, out of the corner of my eye, I see somebody running across the floor, knocking over chairs, working their way towards me. It was Johnny Cash. He said, Benny, he didn't even question anything, just went at it right away. Took out 2 of those guys like nothing. He said he mopped the floor with them. He took them out. He said, Benny, I was doing my best. This guy was too big though. I was doing my best, just absolute best I could, but it just wasn't working. And then he said, Johnny Cash saw that my dad was having trouble, so victim 3, Johnny Cash took him out also. They thought it was the greatest ever. Of course, they got escorted out of Birdland, but I think that's an outstanding feat in itself. So anytime somebody says something about Birdland or mentions Birdland in a song, whatever, I always think of that story. And I'll always remember my dad telling me that story hundreds of times. But I know for a fact in my heart that both he and Johnny Cash are up there talking about the good old times, reminiscing. And if you ever question my dad, he was a tall guy. He's tall and slender, but nicest guy ever. But he pushed the wrong buttons, not the nicest guy ever. Johnny Cash, I'm just gonna say this, who knows what YouTube will say about this language, but Johnny Cash, he was a badass since the day he was born. My dad, like I said, drank coffee from the age of 4. Johnny Cash, buttermilk since the age of 4. Huge difference. But they were the best of friends, and I honestly miss my dad. But I know they're up there having a good time. That was Birdland Breakdown.